So who I am, hi, I'm Simona. Nervous silliness. I am a remothering and empowered parenting coach and founder of remothering.org, which is how Rachel and I met. Because at remothering.org, what we do is it's a space for resources from across modalities, practitioners, and healers to be a resource for everyone. And one of the things that we do is we have this beautiful masterclass, and Rachel is part of our guest faculty there, along with some other names that folks may recognize, and I will name drop if I may, which
Please
is,
do.
Rachel is in really great company with some other really wonderful people that your audience may know. For example, best-selling authors, Dr. Nicole LePera, who is known as the holistic psychologist on Instagram. She's amazing.
Yes.
Dr. Lindsay Gibson, best-selling author, and just amazing body of work on adult children of emotionally immature parents, which is really heavily influences the work that I do. So that's how Rachel and I met. She was part of our guest faculty.
So the people in my world, we are empaths, we are sensitive people, and the women, I typically coach women, some men every once in a while, but they typically come in with like, can I talk about my mother? And so that's
Mm.
how this kind of developed as well. So yes, empaths, also highly sensitive people, and a lot of us struggle with some, I like to call it here in the South, mama drama.
Mm.
And I think people down here or people from all over, they're like, oh, that makes sense. It's just this one liner that I like to
Oh
use.
my God.
And then one of my friends that I was coaching, she said, I just feel like a dutiful daughter. And so,
It's such a powerful.
oh, it was just like that. Just that's one little title. It's dutiful daughter. So just a few questions. The women that we both speak to, we really wrestle with this like this tug of war of trying to be ourselves and
Hmm.
like what, my mom wants this different thing for me. She's got different expectations. And in your opinion, in your line of work, what is one of the first things that somebody can do when they realize they've got a lot of guilt and kind of feel stuck in the
Mhm.
middle? Stuck in the middle. What is your suggestion?
Wow. So you just said a lot of things. And I want to name that empath piece and that mama drama piece. It so makes sense that it comes together. What I find so often is that when folks are empathic and caring, that complicated mother-daughter dynamic has such far-reaching impact on the lives of those daughters. And so, and guilt, yes, guilt is super present. And whew, I think that when you ask what would I suggest for that, or what in my perspective could be a great tool, the question is partially the answer, especially for those of us that are dutiful daughters, good daughters, um, which is the naming of it. Because when we're in the vortex of the guilt and we don't even have a homeopathic dose of ourselves outside of the guilt, we can get into this endless loop. And especially, again, with that dutiful daughter, we can self-censor or judge the thought instead of noticing the thought, honoring the thought, and getting curious about the thought. And so, what I would say is if we think about, like, I'd like to invite us all to picture like having a beach ball in the pool, and like if you're playing and it's fun, and but then you gotta try and like push the beach ball. Have you ever tried to do this? Push the beach ball underwater, and you can, but it takes up so much energy and attention and focus. And when we are in the guilt, but we're self-censoring and not allowing ourselves to get curious about the guilt or what may be causing the guilt. It's almost like we're holding down that beach ball and we're not, rather than honoring our inner wisdom. because we don't have to do anything with the information. And so many of us have this loyalty tripwire that goes where we're like, we can't even look at it, we can't even acknowledge it because that would be disloyal. And we almost, it's not even self-censorship. It happens at an unconscious level. We can feel the guilt and we don't realize we've self-censored the thought almost. And so a quick solution is to, when we feel that, to recognize that getting curious about what it is we may be thinking or feeling, we don't have to do anything with that information. Therefore, it is not disloyal. And hopefully we can even talk to our loyalty tripwire and say, hey, loyalty one inside of me, I see you and I honor you. And I'm just curious what's going on here, because as we have those internal conversations with ourselves, that's information. I like to think of the circuits and systems inside between our brain, between our own two ears. I like to personify them as an internal community. And it's almost like I have one internal community member who's like all about it. Yes, to the self-awareness. Let's talk about mindfulness. I have another internal community member that is like, don't talk to me about, you don't know my mom, you don't know what you're talking about. Right? There's inner
Mm.
conflict between our own two ears. And when there's inner conflict between our own two ears, there's not the integration, there's not the working together. And so I would say that's the whole goal of remothering, is to have that harmony between our own two ears, that inner community, that inner connection, that care and love all happening where we're listening to one another.
The term remothering.
Mm.
How would you describe someone who hears this for the first time and they're like, remothering? How would you
I
describe
um,
that?
I love, love, love that question. Thank you. I there is a formal definition, and I'll share that in a moment, but I'd love to start
Sure.
with my informal definition, which is, I see remothering as the self-care practice of turning within to access that nurturance and wise counsel and belonging and acceptance and love and all of the other mother qualities that we humans naturally seek and we may or may not have had modeled for us growing up. And so just a moment ago, I was talking about the conversations we're having, internalized conversations we're having between our own two ears. What were we modeled, right? And how do we speak to ourselves? And a sign that we might benefit from the remothering work is if you're feeling the weight of expectations that aren't even yours, and that guilt and those shoulds that create blind spots and that pull us away from our truest self. And so what the remothering work does is it supports us in becoming our own source of clarity and alignment with our most authentic and truest selves. So the formal definition is that remothering is the process and practice of updating patterns and rewiring with intention so that we can turn within to access the mother qualities we seek. So.
Thank you. It is a way for us to learn to trust ourselves. Would you?
I would love that. I do.
Okay,
I
because
love that.
that's really what I picked up. Like if I was just doing the 30,000
Once,
foot view and I'm like, that feels like a lot of trust and just little
yes.
things, like just the tiniest things.
It's interesting that you're asking that question in that way, which is because it's almost like a mosaic of things. I mean, I'm glad we started with definition,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, that a way we can trust ourselves. I also think of it as a way that we can create more harmony between our own two ears. And then I don't usually lead with that though. For those of us that have certain background, we might think that harmony between our own two ears, like a relationship with ourselves, is indulgent, right? And we
Mhm.
we so it's just really have to be mindful of even how we speak to ourselves in our own internal community. Really is so many of us receive misguided information about
Mm.
what it means to be indulgent, what it means to be selfish, because a relationship with ourselves that is, it is really our ability to surf those uncomfortable feelings, to be able to notice we might have misguided programming that is pointing us in the wrong direction in one small area, like, for example, in an area that tells us that it's indulgent to have a relationship with ourselves or to prioritize kindness to ourselves.
This work, obviously, is very personal to you. And so we'll get into the next layer of this. And I love listening to people's stories. It just lights my brain up. What has your journey been like that led you to doing this, not the easiest work, but
Not the
also
easiest
this
work.
super important work? That's like your dharma, your life's work, it seems like. What drew you to focusing on this particular issue?
That's a big question. And I appreciate the way you're asking. There are so many ways to answer this question, but
Sure.
those feelings of push-pull that we were talking about
Mhm.
earlier were definitely themes of my childhood and the first many years of my adulthood. And so there's so many ways into this story, but I think that maybe the shortest way to tell the story is one of my ways of showing up in the world was that I believed that if I worked hard enough, like, and I could be everything that my mom needed me to be, then I would have some leftover time so that I could also have time for me. What I was starting to notice over time was like that time for me, it just never comes, right? It's just there's just always the bar is high and the expectations are high. And when I was young, if I'd ever say anything about that, my mom's response would be like, well, everything I want for you is just what good people want or what good people do. Do you want to be bad? Like, you know, and and of course I don't want to be bad, and
No.
especially as a smaller person, like that black and white, that binary, you're either my way or bad. I received that message enough, young enough, and in repetition enough that I didn't think to question it. At some point, it became my big T truth. And what I didn't realize at the time was that that's conditioning me to live in an outside in, the focus of my attention outside in. And so when we have that early training where that outside in becomes our way of seeing and thinking and operating, that sets us up for some pretty predictable adaptations. Now we don't all have all of them, but that can show up as people pleasing, that can show up as not having a clear sense of what a boundary is, that can show up as perfectionism, that can show up as performance for worth. Like, so, okay, well, I can prove to myself that I am worthy of love because I got an A, or, whatever accomplishment we can point to, that perform for worth accomplishment, outside in sense of value of ourself, outside in perspective on, I mean, even just scanning the room and noticing who needs what immediately when you walk into the room, instead of noticing like what do you need as you take a breath. And so those adaptations got me into some pickles in life. And until life was finally like, you're gonna need to look at these things. And so when we're operating from that outside in, it's like holding that beach ball we were talking about earlier. It takes so much energy and it can deplete us. And the thing is, when we're so focused on applying that energy to holding that beach ball and we don't have access to all of our wisdom. We don't have access to seeing that there's a third way. And especially if we receive that conditioning earlier, like it's my way good, not my way bad. There are a lot of good third ways. And so when we can't access outside of the binary, when we can't have access to more solutions, more nuance, that's a sign that, well, actually, it's a sign of our brains being in slight fight flight. That's one of the things that happens when our brains are feeling a social threat. When we're feeling
Mm.
physical threat, like a put up your dukes kind of physical threat, there are some things our physical bodies will do. But when we're feeling social threat, some of the ways that shows up is judgment, agenda, and also it can show up in binary, black and white thinking. And so what I want to say is that life has a way of mm, presenting us opportunities to notice that um, we might have some outdated programming. And
Now,
so what So my ways of relating to the what I believed love was like you revolve around another person. And so not
Perfectly said.
unsurprisingly, I accidentally married someone who wanted me to revolve around them in that same way. Like it was a very, I'll just call it dysfunctional and toxic. I'm not going to get into the
Sure. Yeah.
details of
Yeah.
that marriage, but it wasn't healthy. I got set free from that dysfunctional relationship when I had a toddler and I was 2 weeks pregnant in a conversation that went like, we need to talk. Yes, we do. Okay, you could go first. I'm pregnant. Oh, I was going to say I'm leaving you. But now I don't know what
We are.
so like that was like, wow. And that was what was interesting was I was like, what on earth? I'd know, like, in hindsight, I'm so lucky. And in hindsight, anyone could have been like, this is a very bad idea. Like, this relationship is a bad idea. Like, but at the time, it was shock and surprise. And so I went to therapy. And what was really interesting was I want to talk about how the first question the therapist asks is like, tell me about your family, your history. And I was like, well, my mom, she's great. And she's like, well, can we get underneath that? And what's interesting is when I was in high school, I had an eating disorder for a moment. Um, and the reason I say for a moment is because one of my friends told on me. And so my mom's like, we need to go to therapy. You need to go to therapy, which I thought was like, I'm so proud of my mom for having that reaction. And the first question the therapist asks is, let's talk about your relationship with your mom. And I was like, you're disloyal. This thing is not going to help. I'm just not going to have an eating disorder because I don't want to make my mom look bad. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that she was bad. I definitely just made a mistake, blah, blah, blah. Right. So, like, squash the eating disorder. But now, fast forward to this moment in time, I'm in my early 30s. I am now like pregnant. I have a toddler. I'm the sole provider of my family. I had to divest my 401k so that we could split our assets, and I had to start my career all the way over again. I mean, I was working at that, but it's a really hard time, and I don't have time to say no to this therapist who's asking me about my
Yeah.
relationship with my
So
mother.
good.
And all of a sudden, I could see some things that were hiding in plain sight. So it was hard work. It was definitely hard work to dig under the just so many uh, patterns that were not helpful and um, also hard because I was doing this work as I'm raising my kids, and so even still, like realizing, like, oh, I have modeled squishy boundaries for my children in my relationship with my mother, and oh, I modeled this behavior, by repeating the patterns and having this relationship with their father. So this is a very long story to say what inspired me to guide other women on this remothering journey is that I have found that remothering has become for me a way to break that cycle, to find those third ways. And I know that the journey is hard, but I also know firsthand, and I've said this sentence before, I don't think I've ever said it without crying, but I know what it's like to be the daughter of someone who didn't take that hard journey. And when you said it seems like my dharma, it is my dharma because if someone feels called to take this hard journey, it is a hard journey. And so because of the timing of when I took the journey, it's like the beginning of the internet, no social media, like I was stumbling forward, making up the roadmap as I went, making like every possible mistake you can, figuring out how to correct that. And then so what I now offer is a roadmap, and a roadmap with compassion, because if someone's like, oh, this is uncomfortable, or I made this mistake, I could be like, yeah, I've been there too. I know what that feels like. And so yeah. So this is my calling and my dharma because I really, for anyone who feels called to or want to take this journey, this of growth, I want to offer a roadmap. I want to offer tools because I believe that when we can cultivate greater harmony between our own two ears, that can ripple out into the world in positive and meaningful ways.
I will say it's very courageous because this is literally the hardest work I've ever done. That relationship, and I'm putting my hands up because I know not a lot of women are comfortable talking about this, that's another layer, right?
Oh, please. My
They're like, oh,
job as a
everything's
child.
great. Everything is perfect. Right, Mom? I'm just kidding. But I will say, my meditation mentor, David G, he's like, what was your crawling on broken glass moment that is leading you to the Dharma path? And I was like, oh my gosh, that, in my opinion, you might have had a couple of crawling on broken glass moments in life, as we all have. But the one that sticks out is like, that was a pivotal moment for you to do this hard work and to show everybody else out there that, hey, there's a roadmap now. There was not a roadmap. Or if there was, nobody was talking about it, probably.
I used to spend so much time in the library or in Barnes and Noble, but not buying. That's probably unfortunately like my border. I would just like look through like every book and yeah.
Every book. I've got them all. I don't, but it feels like I do.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I
And
mean,
for
you're
everybody
good.
listening, I hope there was something there for you. I'm just
Absolutely. So, if you could go ahead and talk about rewriting old patterns. So, as we know, our relationships with our mothers can set us onto this pattern of we think this is normal. What advice would you give somebody who wants to start to break those old patterns or habits? I'm just not sure where to start.
that's a great question. And thinking that's a nice technical question to bring me out of my lots of emotion. And so the first thing I want to say to that question is that neuroplasticity is on our side. And that is the most important piece of my answer, which is really cool. And actually, even the answer, the question is a bit of the answer back again, just normalizing it, naming it, that it's possible. What I want to say is there are two things. One is if we're noticing emotional temperature in a conversation, if we're noticing emotional temperature in something we're thinking about, that's a clue. And if we could start collecting the clues, that's the first part, because that helps us pull things out of our blind spots, because we can't even work with the things that we can't see. But unfortunately, just because we can't see them doesn't mean they're not impacting us.
Yeah.
And so a really practical tool that we can lean into for that rewiring old patterns is, again, I like to think of the circuits and systems in my brain as, to personify them as an internal community. We treat the panicked one like we would if there was a very upset toddler who was freaking out. We'd be like, we'd treat them well. Like, what's going on, sweetie? Or sometimes we're like, it's way past your bedtime, and like we just scoop them up and get them safe, but like we treat them still with love and care. Sometimes it's with firm love and care, sometimes it's with patient love and care, but with love and care and respect. So we collect that information in that remothering moment, but the practice is that we do it over and over again so that those circuits can get to know one another. Essentially, those circuits can start to recognize one another and trust that they can collaborate.
A lot of the work at remothering.org, it centers around the collaboration. I want you to talk about, if you can explain why you think it's important that all of these experts come together and how they help people find the tools and the support they need. That's one of my favorite things.
Bridge that too. I want to name, there's two aspects to collaboration. There's the collaboration between our own two ears, which is so important. And then there's the collaboration at remothering.org, which is between different practitioners and healers. And that felt really important to me because of my own personal history. We just talked about that. There is one right way. Well, there is in fact not one right way. And we all come to our healing journeys, our remothering journeys, having traveled a different path. And so the modalities and practitioners and healers that might resonate with us at different moments in our journey or different legs of our journey are going to be different. And so while most of the speakers have their own coaching practices. You have your own private coaching practice. I have my own private coaching practice. I mentioned some of the other speakers have writing careers and Instagram platforms. Everybody has their voice, but when we come together at remothering.org, there is a 6-step framework that we follow, that is the roadmap. But then within each step, there are guest faculty teaching different perspectives and ways of approaching those steps so that we can all find the things that resonate with us most, because that's where the collaboration comes. It's almost modeling and reminding ourselves, both for our own internal communities, like the two things can be true. That can be true for our internal community, and that can be true in the collaboration at remothering.org. There's so many layers for that. For in terms of the teaching, it can be really powerful, because as we're navigating this roadmap where we learn to spot blind spots, and we learn to break free and unlearn outdated patterns that no longer serve, and we learn to rewire with intention, and then that's all the internal work, and then we go out into the world and we apply that in our relationships with other people, some who have started to do their own work and some who have not. So that is relational well-being and boundaries. And so getting to collaborate with different people in their areas of expertise along that roadmap, it's really quite, it's just really quite cool. I got an email once from someone that felt like it summarized it for my heart, which was, she's like, I feel like I'm being mothered and remothered and modeling mothering as a village, like with all these wise
Yes.
aunties and, mothers and grandmothers. And she's like, and then I'm getting to internalize that experience. And she wrote how she was like, I'm watching you all interact with one another, and then I'm also pulling nuggets and pieces from each talk and weaving a tapestry of my own inner voice now that I
Yes.
can lean into. And so it's been really so heartwarming, especially in these times where there's so much divisiveness. It's a complicated time. And then you have this place where different people, different faculty members come together, and instead of the divisiveness, there's collaboration and kindness. And it's really heartwarming. And I feel really honored at all the incredible people who step in and give their time for the remothering.org community, even though we have our own private practices. It's just really nice that there's this resource available. And I'll just name, while I'm speaking about it, there are a lot of free pieces over at remothering.org. And then
Awesome.
there is also a comprehensive masterclass online course, which Rachel is a faculty member at, and as are some of the other esteemed colleagues that I just shared. If people are listening and they want to explore remothering and the themes that we've touched on even more deeply, and because Rachel is a guest faculty member, your listeners can get 20% off there if they use the coupon code with your name, Rachel K. Hudson.
And I just wanted to add on to that, the collaboration part. And I'm not sure if you see this, but the people that I work with, that they've come to this, and I think I developed that too. Like, there's only one source of truth, and that's your mom. Like, there's only one right way to do things. And you're opening this, I know, you're opening this remothering roadmap, and we've got so many people, and there's just like different perspectives. Sometimes it might be a similar
Yes.
idea, but just listening to so many and knowing that there's different ways to approach, different ways to do things, and there's not like, if you don't do it this certain way,
there's good.
you're wrong.
You're wrong.
That's it.
Because there is, in fact, more than one way.
There's more than one
way to
way.
play forward, more than one way to do it, more than one way to
And
navigate
I
a
think a lot of
healing
women get
journey.
stuck in that, like, well, it's my mom wouldn't approve of that way to do things. But I think
Yeah.
it opens up this, like, your shoulders can relax. There's different ways to try on. And if it doesn't resonate, like, I see this in myself, like something doesn't quite stick just yet. And then after I've grown a little bit, coming back into it, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense because maybe my brain is ready to like put it all together. So I want to thank
Or
you for bringing
sometimes
all
it
that.
is just something to toss. Sometimes it
Sometimes,
applies
yes,
to somebody's life path, but not somebody else's life
it
path.
doesn't resonate for some. And
Mhm.
not being like, it's not good or bad. It's just like,
Yeah, exactly.
my thing, but okay.
Yeah, you know what? I do have one other thing I was going to bring forward. Well,
Mhm.
what I want to talk about is for those folks listening that are both on their own remothering journey, but also happen to be mothers. Now, we're not all
Yes,
mothers,
I'm not.
but if we are mothers, and 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 if we are mothers, there's a unique set of challenges. I mean, everybody, whether we're mothers or not, we all have our own unique set of challenges. But if you're listening and you're a mother and you have young children, I'm so happy for you, and I'm so happy for your young children because you're on this path so early. And if you are a mother and you're a mother of a late teen or a young adult or even an older adult, and you're like, wow, I would have really liked to have known all of these things so much sooner. First of all, I want to say I am right there with you, even though it's interesting because I was sharing my story and I got onto the path very early on. Keep finding things that were in my blind spots. And so now, the kids are launching and I'm like, but I didn't teach them this thing or I didn't model that thing. And I want to like laugh and smile when I talk about cringe,
Mm.
but it makes me really happy when we can hold the cringe because what it means, I almost want to say good. Um, what it means is we can feel really hard things and not dismiss them. And I think as you were talking about, if the folks that are listening can identify with dutiful daughter, then they can probably identify with that deny, dismiss, distort, like there's no problem with me. Our ability to hold those really uncomfortable feelings that paves the way for deeper and more authentic relationships with ourselves and with the people we love most in this world. And so, what I want to say to parents who are holding that cringe is would we have liked to have known this sooner? Of course, we
Yeah.
would have. But the coolest thing that we can hold on to and really hold on to is that we're modeling something for our children, which is that we get to be imperfect beings because that the human adventure, as much as we tried to be perfect for our moms, human adventure in reality is a messy and imperfect unfolding process. And we get to model that for our kids, that our becoming is a lifelong process. And that can be so crucial to them because while, yes, it'd be cool if we'd known all this sooner and had modeled different things, maybe then they wouldn't have gotten to learn the lesson that we all get to
Yeah.
keep growing. And I'm chuckling because it's not really funny. We don't want to say to our kids, "Oh, my bad."
Oops.
Whoops. Here's a little fun for your therapy. But
I'm so glad you touched on that. Let's talk about parents trying to
yeah,
raise these kids and
yeah,
late
yeah,
teens and early adults.
yeah. It's so natural. And so and back to the roadmap, what I want to say is if that's something that you're wrestling with, you are not the only one,
Yeah.
and that there are tools and that you can know that here's, I guess, the last piece I'd want to leave parents with, which is this. You're here, you've reached however old you have reached, and like figured a lot of stuff out, even without maybe parental support. Maybe yes,
Right.
maybe no. We all figure it out. So, yes, we might have wished we did a few different things with our kids, but they are amazing. They got to have you as their parent. They got to have a parent that is doing the work and is able to mentor, lead, hold space, accompaniment, validate that, yeah, the human adventure is complicated and I'll walk with you. I don't have it all figured out, but I'll walk with you. And that's really all our kids need anyway. They don't
Right.
always really need the answers. They just need the love, the respect, the accompaniment, the validation.
Yeah. Thank you. Having the parent that is doing the work and just getting back in there, trying. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work and it's good work. I want to thank you for doing this work and sharing the collaboration and
Mm.
just sharing your wisdom and your journey and your experience with everyone. And once again, where can people find you?
I guess as I'm about to say where to find me, it is what it highlights is, I guess is the very last thing I want to say is no myth of perfection. Clearly, even on the journey, it it's not that I don't have these human reactions. It's that I then meet them kindly. And then instead of going into like a thought hijack that could last for a really long time, it's like, oh, this happened. Now I'm going to breathe and now I'm going to move through it. And so that moment where I just was like, wow, I just shared my story very publicly, had this a chorus of inner voices about that. And then I had that moment of like, and it's okay.
It
And
was
it's
okay.
okay. And so I just want to name that it doesn't mean that those thoughts disappear. It means that they get to be met.
Yeah.
And so, how people can find me, if this has resonated with you, there are a couple ways to find me. One is visiting me at remothering.org, and that's where you can find all that rich, juicy collaboration. And then, if you are the parent of a late teen or a young adult and you are looking for empowered parenting coaching of someone who has walk this journey. If you're, for example, struggling with when to offer guidance and when to step back and hold space as they forge their own path, messy and all, and those are things that you're wrestling with, you can check out my private coaching over at centerforremothering.com. And so that's how you can find
Okay.
me.
Thank you
And then,
so
and the link
much.
again, if you do, if someone wants to take that course, we'll make sure that they get that 20% code.
Yes, I'll make sure that's in the show notes. And
Fantastic.
with that, I think I will close it up. Thank you so much for joining. I hope to see you next time. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others.